Welcome back, pop culture detectives. 2026 was supposed to be the perfectly orchestrated grand reunion year for BTS. But hold on, have you noticed something seriously off lately? Are these bizarre Easter eggs deliberately planted by HYBE, or is there a massive secret actively unfolding behind the scenes of history's biggest music comeback? Why are the members suddenly dropping subtle hints that contradict each other? What exactly are they trying to hide from us right before the curtain rises? Grab your magnifying glasses because we are diving deep into the shadows to uncover the truth. Here is what's really going on. 7 oddities behind BTS's 2026 comeback that are making ARMY suspicious. Number 7. RM's missing studio archives gone. Have you ever walked into a room you've known your whole life, only to find the furniture completely rearranged and the walls painted a color that makes your skin prickle with an undeniable sense of unfamiliarity? That is exactly the chilling sensation creeping up the collective spine of the ARMY fandom when we look at Kim Namjoon, our steadfast leader, RM, as we approach this highly anticipated 2026 mega reunion. For years, Namjoon has been the very brain, the philosophical anchor, and the transparent communicator of BTS, famously inviting us into a sanctuary known as HYBE, a studio that was previously a warm, wood-toned museum of Kao's figurines, rare modern art pieces, mostly by his favorite Korean contemporary artists like Jungkook, and towering stacks of books that eventually made their way into his deep, introspective lyricism. Whenever a massive BTS project was brewing on the horizon, Namjoon was our reliable spoiler king, the guy who would accidentally show a file name on his desktop during a Weverse Live, or drop cryptic but traceable intellectual clues on his Instagram stories that brilliant ARMY detectives would decode within hours. But fast forward to the current landscape of early 2026, roughly 10 months after his official military discharge in June 2025, and the archive we once knew seems to have been swallowed by a digital and physical black hole. The oddity isn't just that he is being quiet, it is the deliberate, almost surgical erasure of his usual patterns that has alarm bells ringing at maximum volume. A few weeks ago, a highly suspicious, incredibly fleeting event occurred that most of the internet missed, but not the eagle-eyed veteran fans. Namjoon went live for a staggering total of 3 minutes. In that broadcast, the background was not the comforting, art-filled walls of the new HYBE building studio we expected. Instead, it was a completely stark, soundproofed white room, totally devoid of any personal touches, art, or even his signature bonsai tree. He didn't say a single word about the upcoming 2026 comeback album. He merely stared into the camera with an unreadable, intense expression, played a raw, distorted 5-second audio clip that sounded like a reverse ticking clock mixed with a heavy synth bass, whispered, "Everything you know is about to be rewritten," and abruptly ended the stream, subsequently wiping the VOD from existence as if it never happened. Why would the man who practically holds the architectural blueprints of BTS's entire discography suddenly resort to such psychological, thriller-level theatrics? Is this a massive hint that the 2026 comeback is completely discarding their established sonic identity to pivot into an entirely experimental, unprecedented genre that HYBE is terrified to leak? Furthermore, let's look at the hard facts and the KOMCA, Korea Music Copyright Association, a usually foolproof hunting ground for early comeback spoilers. Historically, months before a major release, we would see Namjoon's name popping up under new registration codes, hinting at collaborations, track titles, or subunit projects. Yet as of right now, his registration list is completely frozen, locked down with an anomalous pending internal review status that industry insiders claim is highly unusual for a musical group of this massive magnitude, unless there's a monumental restructuring of intellectual property happening behind closed doors. Are they renegotiating their creative boundaries, or is this reunion actually the launchpad for an entirely new overarching universe that requires absolute ironclad secrecy?
Remember the raw, unfiltered vulnerability he served us with his pre-enlistment solo endeavors like Indigo and the jarringly brilliant, boundary-pushing visual album Right Place, Wrong Person? Those critically acclaimed projects were testaments to a man desperately trying to find his true, authentic self outside the monolithic, suffocating shadow of the world's biggest boy band. During his mandatory military service, serving dutifully in the military band, and occasionally spotted looking sharp in his crisp red uniform, fans naturally speculated he was quietly brewing the ultimate synthesis of Kim Namjoon the individual and RM the BTS frontman. But the reality we're facing right now actively contradicts all those comforting theories. Instead of a beautiful synthesis, we are witnessing an absolute terrifying blackout. Some hardcore conspiracy theorists within the fandom are even pointing out that his recent sporadic Instagram stories, which used to be beautifully curated galleries of nature walks, museum visits, and late-night studio sessions, have suddenly morphed into a series of incredibly low-resolution, almost glitch art-style images of brutalist architecture, shattered mirrors, and empty liminal spaces, always posted at exactly 4:04 a.m. KST. Is the 404 error not found internet metaphor intentional here? Is he desperately signaling that the comforting, predictable RM we are looking for currently does not exist in the new system? When you combine this unsettling visual language with the absolute deafening silence from the official big hit music PR team regarding his producer credits for the upcoming monumental album, the anxiety becomes undeniably palpable. We are not just talking about a simple surface-level aesthetic change. We are potentially looking at a complete philosophical reboot of the group's entire ethos, spearheaded by a genius leader who has seemingly decided that the only way to genuinely move forward is to completely shatter the rear-view mirror. Think deeply about the immense emotional weight of this situation, guys. For over a decade, we have heavily relied on Namjoon's steady hand to safely guide us through the complex HYYH era lore, the love yourself psychological revelations, and the map of the soul introspective journeys. We trust him implicitly with our hearts, but this sudden shift from the comforting, open book intellectual to a shadowy, highly cryptic figure feels significantly less like a clever marketing strategy and much more like a deliberate, painful dismantling of their own sacred past. The emotional whiplash of transitioning from the warm, nostalgic, tear-filled promises of "we will meet you in 2025" at their Festa dinners to this cold, calculated, and slightly terrifying silence of 2026 is leaving the entire global fandom dizzy with a potent mixture of wild anticipation and undeniable dread. Is this the ultimate test of ARMY's blind faith? Are we being challenged to follow our trusted leader into the absolute pitch-black dark without a single comforting breadcrumb of familiarity? It raises incredibly terrifying, yet undeniably thrilling questions. What if the 2026 comeback isn't a direct continuation of the beloved BTS we hit pause on in 2022, but rather the explosive birth of a completely unrecognizable avant-garde entity? What if the iconic archive was forcibly emptied because the very concept of archiving their glorious past is directly contrary to the dangerous, forward-facing energy they are about to unleash upon the music industry? Could this drastic, almost out-of-character behavioral shift be a flashing neon sign that the crushing burden of the pop culture crown has prompted Namjoon to ruthlessly burn down the old safe BTS framework to absolute ashes, just so a completely new, untouchable musical phoenix can rise from the rubble? We are standing on the very edge of the biggest musical event of the entire decade, and the brilliant captain of the ship is intentionally throwing away the compass right in front of our panicked eyes, leaving us desperately wondering if we are heading towards a glorious promised land or diving straight headfirst into the eye of a terrifying creative hurricane that will permanently alter the global pop music landscape forever.
Number 6. Jin Celestial Coordinates Unmatched. Let us hit the rewind button for a moment and deeply reflect on the absolute emotional anchor of this entire group, Kim Sek-jin, our beloved worldwide handsome, who bravely took that first terrifying and deeply emotional step into the harsh reality of mandatory military enlistment back in the freezing winter of December 2022. Do you remember the tears, the buzz cut, the way the younger members instinctively crowded around him, patting his head with a mixture of immense pride and palpable anxiety? And do you also remember the sheer, unadulterated euphoria that violently erupted across the globe when he became the very first member to be officially discharged in June 2024, greeted by an ecstatic Namjoon playing a slightly off-key rendition of Dynamite on the saxophone? For the entirety of 2024 and the majority of 2025, Jin was the ultimate shining beacon of hope for a deeply lonely army. He was absolutely everywhere. He graciously hosted a wildly successful Festa event where he literally gave out free warm hugs to thousands of crying fans. He dominated the variety show circuit with his trademark infectious windshield wiper laugh, and he tirelessly worked to keep the BTS brand vividly alive and accessible while his 6 brothers were still serving their country. He was the comforting, hilarious, deeply human bridge between the painful hiatus and the promised 2026 reunion. But now, as we stand here in the spring of 2026, desperately counting down the days to the grand comeback, a massive, chilling paradigm shift has completely swallowed Sek-jin's public persona. The warm, comforting bridge he built has seemingly been vaporized overnight, replaced by an eerie, impenetrable wall of high-concept, sci-fi level silence. The absolute most glaring anomaly centers around Wu Tao, the adorable, plush-like astronaut mascot, originally created to promote Jin's deeply moving, Coldplay-assisted 2022 farewell single, The Astronaut. The Astronaut was a profound, tear-jerking musical love letter to ARMY, explicitly detailing a lost space traveler who finally found his true home on Earth with his fans. However, late last year, the officially verified Wu Tao Instagram account, which had been peacefully dormant for years, suddenly jolted back to life. But instead of posting cute, behind-the-scenes Polaroids of Jin eating macarons or playing tennis, the account has been completely hijacked by a deeply unsettling cryptic narrative. Wu Tao is now exclusively posting jarring glitch art-style videos, heavily laced with pure binary code, terrifyingly distorted audio clips that sound like solar winds crashing against a broken radio receiver, and a series of incredibly specific, real-world astronomical coordinates. When brilliant, hyper-dedicated ARMY detectives fed these exact coordinates into advanced mapping software and astrophysics databases, the results sent absolute shockwaves through the fandom. These coordinates do not point to the HYBE building in Seoul. They do not point to the stadium in Argentina where he performed with Coldplay, and they do not even point to anywhere on planet Earth. Instead, they mathematically align with the exact locations of desolate rogue planets floating in the pitch-black void of interstellar space and the chaotic, icy debris of the distant Oort cloud. Why on earth is a pop star's previously adorable mascot suddenly acting like a highly classified NASA probe that has just intercepted a terrifying distress signal from an alien intelligence? Furthermore, let's talk about Sek-jin's sudden, alarming physical disappearance from the public eye. The man who used to shamelessly and hilariously demand screen time is nowhere to be found. He abruptly and shockingly canceled a highly anticipated, heavily promoted appearance on a major South Korean primetime television show just weeks ago, offering absolutely zero personal explanation. The only communication the production staff received was a cold, incredibly brief official email from Big Hit Music that simply read, "The flight path has been permanently altered."
Altered to where, Sekjin? Are we completely losing the warm human element of BTS right before our panicked eyes? To make matters even more intense, rumors from highly credible K-pop industry insiders suggest that Jin has completely and perhaps permanently abandoned his trademark soaring, silver-voiced angelic high notes that beautifully defined masterworks like Epiphany and Moon. Unverified but widely circulated leaks from a highly secluded, heavily guarded underground recording studio in the remote mountains of Gyeonggi-do whisper that Jin has spent the last 4 months rigorously training his vocal cords to strictly record in a chilling, hauntingly deep baritone register, allegedly employing dark Gregorian chant styles and heavy, menacing operatic theatrics that sound more akin to a cinematic villain's theme song than a bubbly K-pop anthem. We must also never forget that Kim Sekjin graduated from the highly prestigious Jungkook University with a degree in acting, a potent, incredibly refined talent that armies have literally begged him to fully utilize for over a decade. Is this bizarre, coordinate-dropping, silent 2026 comeback phase actually secretly functioning as Jin's grand, long-awaited theatrical acting debut? Not confined to a standard weekend K-drama, but rather unleashed within a massive, immersive alternate reality game cinematic universe that HYBE is meticulously building to completely disrupt the global music industry. The stark, brutal contrast between the warm, accessible Jin who held our hands through the darkest days of the hiatus and this cold, distant, cosmic entity he is methodically portraying right now is giving the entire fan base severe emotional whiplash. Think deeply about the terrifying narrative implications here. If the astronaut was about him beautifully landing on Earth to stay with us, these new deep space coordinates and his chilling public silence strongly imply that the astronaut is now being violently, against his will, pulled back into the terrifying, lonely void of deep space. It fundamentally forces you to question everything you thought you knew about this so-called reunion. We naively thought 2026 was going to be a giant, confetti-filled, emotional healing welcome home party, but Sekjin's undeniably bizarre, highly calculated behavior suggests that the home they are returning to is actively being dismantled from the inside out. He was the steadfast anchor holding the massive BTS ship steady while the others were away, but now that they are all finally back together, it seems the anchor has deliberately detached itself, plummeting into a dark, unfathomable abyss. Every single time we look at those cold, unfeeling, glitching coordinate posts on Wuteo's grid, we are painfully forced to ask ourselves, is the Kim Sekjin we intimately knew and fiercely loved, the wildly charismatic guy who smuggled massive RJ plushies through strict airport security, bickered endlessly with Jungkook, and made terrible dad jokes until Jimin literally fell out of his chair, gone forever? Has he been ruthlessly replaced by a meticulously crafted, intensely serious conceptual persona designed to psychologically shock the entire world? The sheer, crushing psychological weight of this mysterious transformation is immense precisely because Sekjin has always been our emotional safe space. Whenever the Bangtan universe lore got too dark, or the fan theories became too convoluted and heavy, Sekjin was the grounded, hilarious, refreshing reality check we desperately needed to breathe. To suddenly witness him become the very epicenter of this unsettling, high-concept, borderline terrifying mystery is undoubtedly the most alarming oddity of them all, a violently flashing neon warning sign that the 2026 BTS comeback is not going to be a simple nostalgic victory lap, but rather a chaotic, awe-inspiring event that will shatter every single expectation, permanently rewrite the established rules of fan engagement, and potentially leave us emotionally stranded in a beautifully terrifying new universe where our beloved worldwide handsome has fundamentally evolved into something utterly, wonderfully unfathomable.
Number 5. Suga's phantom alter ego vanished. Let us intensely rewind the clock and deeply analyze the absolute, undeniable enigma that is Min Yoongi, the fierce, spitting rap genius of BTS, the prolific mastermind behind the heavily fortified doors of Genius Lab, and the man who literally bled his darkest traumas onto the stage for us to witness. To truly understand the heart-stopping, spine-chilling oddity currently surrounding him in this chaotic 2026 comeback landscape, we desperately need to revisit the scorching, tear-soaked finale of his historic D-Day solo stadium tour in August 2023. Do you remember that visceral, earth-shattering moment during his performance of Amygdala and The Last? Do you remember him screaming into the microphone, his body trembling as he symbolically and literally laid to rest the heavy, suffocating demons of his past? The starving, underground Daegu rapper known as Gloss, the traumatized delivery boy with the shattered shoulder, and the intensely angry, venom-spitting alter ego, August D. At the very end of that monumental concert, Yoongi turned his back to the weeping, massive stadium crowd, walked through a literal wooden door propped up on the stage, and the door slammed shut behind him, leaving us staring at an empty stage. At the time, we all collectively, and perhaps naively, assumed it was simply a beautiful cinematic metaphor for closure, before he quietly slipped away to fulfill his mandatory public service duties. We genuinely believed that when he returned in June 2025, he would finally be free, walking out of that same metaphorical door as a completely healed, peacefully smiling Min Yoongi, ready to seamlessly reunite with his 6 brothers and produce the greatest, most triumphant, upbeat pop anthems of their entire career. But fast forward to the intensely confusing, highly secretive reality of early 2026, and a profoundly terrifying realization is beginning to dawn on the global ARMY fandom. What if Yoongi never actually walked back out of that door? The most glaring, deeply unsettling anomaly currently sending absolute shockwaves through K-pop insider circles is the deliberate, systemic, and almost ghostly erasure of his fiercely beloved musical identities. A few weeks ago, highly dedicated fans doing routine checks on global streaming platforms noticed something bizarre. For exactly 24 hours, the official August D artist profile on Spotify and Apple Music completely glitched out. All of his brutally honest, chart-topping mixtapes, from the raw, aggressive 2016 debut to the triumphant, traditional Korean instrument-laced Daechwita and the liberating Hagum, were temporarily replaced by pitch-black album covers, and his artist name was changed to a series of unreadable, blank spatial characters. Big Hit Music furiously blamed a temporary server migration error, but in the hyper-calculated, meticulously controlled universe of HYBE, there are absolutely no such things as mere technical accidents. To make this situation infinitely more suspicious, recent leaks from highly credible sound engineers who allegedly worked on the early mixing sessions for the 2026 BTS comeback album have revealed a completely shocking detail. The iconic, hushed Suga producer whisper tag, the very sonic signature that has proudly stamped every single one of his masterpiece beats for over a decade, is entirely missing from the new tracks. Instead, these leaked audio snippets feature something incredibly jarring: sweeping, melancholic, fully orchestral string arrangements mixed with the haunting, solitary sound of an acoustic piano, completely devoid of any hip-hop trap beats, 808 bass drops, or rap verses. This dramatically aligns with a mysterious, incredibly cryptic, unlisted website that was quietly discovered hidden within the source code of the official BTS fan club page last month. When you enter the hidden URL, you are greeted not by comeback schedules or vibrant concept photos, but by a silent, looping, high-definition video of a vintage, brown, upright piano slowly burning to ashes in an empty concrete warehouse, a direct, undeniable, and deeply emotional visual callback to his haunting First Love short film from the iconic 2016 Wings era and the burning motel room from the I Need You music video.
Why on earth is he forcefully resurrecting the absolute darkest, most painful visual motifs of the HYHY era right when they are supposed to be celebrating a joyous reunion? Think about the immense, crushing philosophical implications of this scenario. For years, Min Yoongi's immense creative power was fueled by his righteous anger, his relentless fight against the oppressive industry, his desperate struggle for mental health survival, and his insatiable hunger to prove his countless vicious doubters wrong. But now that he has conquered the entire globe, topped the Billboard charts, performed at the Grammys, and successfully exercised his deepest personal traumas through the D-Day tour, what happens to the fierce warrior when there are absolutely no more wars left to fight? Is this silent, burning piano a terrifying, undeniable declaration that Suga, the K-pop idol, and Auguste D, the underground rebel, are officially dead, burned to the ground so that a completely unrecognizable avant-garde composer can emerge from the smoke? Some of the most brilliant, hyper-analytical music theorists within the fandom are desperately speculating that Yoongi has completely abandoned traditional pop music structures for this 2026 comeback, refusing to write any lyrics at all, and is instead forcing the group into a highly experimental, narrative-driven instrumental soundscape that perfectly mimics the silent, overwhelming vastness of human grief and rebirth. The sheer emotional weight of his absolute silence right now is deafening. We have always relied on Yoongi to be the brutally honest, pragmatic anchor of the group, the one who would hop on a casual Weverse live stream with his messy hair and a glass of whiskey to calmly explain the realities of the music industry and reassure us that everything was going to be perfectly fine. But his current, absolute refusal to engage, combined with the terrifying, systematic dismantling of his discography's visual and sonic identity, feels deeply like a masterful psychological thriller unfolding in real time. It fundamentally forces us to ask the most terrifying question of all. If the man who bravely carried the heaviest emotional burdens of BTS has completely let go of his past, will we even be able to recognize the music he is about to release? Is he intentionally testing our loyalty, demanding that we blindly love whatever new, potentially jarring artistic entity rises from the ashes of the burning piano? Or is this the ultimate genius misdirection before he drops the most aggressively hard-hitting, earth-shattering rap album the world has ever seen? The devastating contrast between the emotional closure we thought we witnessed at the end of his solo tour and this dark, cryptic, destructive rebirth currently unfolding is leaving millions of fans holding their breath, desperately terrified that the Min Yoongi we are about to meet in 2026 is someone we have never ever encountered before, ready to permanently shatter the very foundation of what it means to be a global pop star.
Number 4. J-Hope's paralyzing stillness, unsettling. Let us take a deep, collective breath and turn our investigative spotlight toward the literal beating heart and kinetic powerhouse of BTS, Jungkook, our eternal sunshine, our main dancer, and the undeniably strict, fiercely passionate performance leader who has historically driven the group's world-renowned, mathematically precise choreography. To comprehend the sheer, bone-chilling magnitude of the anomaly currently surrounding J-Hope in the lead-up to this 2026 reunion, we must first painfully recall exactly who he fundamentally is as an artist. This is the man who single-handedly commanded the Lollapalooza stage in 2022, earning the legendary moniker HYBE as he unleashed a blistering grunge-hop spectacle that proved his stage presence could comfortably rival the greatest rock stars in history. This is the man who, immediately following his triumphant military discharge in October 2024, where a hilariously chaotic Seokjin literally hijacked a slew of reporters just to shove an enormous bouquet of flowers into his arms, blessed us with the Hope on the Street documentary. That brilliant, culturally rich project was a vibrant, joyous celebration of his absolute deepest roots: street dance, popping, locking, and the pure, unadulterated ecstasy of human movement. We naturally and completely understandably assumed that with J-Hope back in the HYBE building, the 2026 BTS comeback was guaranteed to feature the most complex, aggressively energetic, and technically mind-blowing choreography of their entire decade-plus career. We expected the practice room mirrors to be dripping with sweat, the sneaker squeaks to be echoing through the halls, and the iconic Smile Hoya to be radiating that blinding signature warmth. But the reality we are brutally facing right now is the exact horrifying opposite, and it is sending massive, terrifying shockwaves of anxiety through the entire global dance and K-pop community. The oddity is a deliberate, agonizingly profound absence of movement, a terrifying high-concept paralysis that J-Hope seems to be violently forcing onto his own artistic identity. It all started with a highly classified, heavily guarded leak from an anonymous choreographer closely affiliated with Big Hit Music's performance directing team. The leaked document, which rapidly spread like wildfire across encrypted Army Discord servers before being swiftly scrubbed from the internet by HYBE's ruthless legal team, was a meticulously detailed 6-month training schedule for the 2026 title track. However, right next to J-Hope's name, the dance practice column was completely, glaringly blank. At first, fans desperately tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was secretly choreographing it himself in private, or perhaps he was focusing heavily on vocal training to surprise us. But then came the visual confirmations, and they were absolutely terrifying. J-Hope's carefully curated Instagram grid, which used to be an incredibly loud, colorful, hyper-aesthetic visual diary of his eclectic, oversized streetwear outfits, spontaneous studio dance jams, and vibrant behind-the-scenes Polaroids, underwent a sudden, ruthless purge. All the vibrant colors were violently stripped away. In their place, over the last 3 weeks, he has uploaded a series of agonizingly slow, completely silent, high-contrast black and white video loops that are functionally the absolute antithesis of everything J-Hope stands for. In these deeply unsettling clips, he is not dancing. He is not even moving. He is simply standing entirely motionless in massive, liminal, brutally empty spaces, an abandoned underground subway tunnel, a vast, bone-dry concrete reservoir, and a completely stark white, seemingly endless room. He wears severely tailored, oppressively restrictive, almost dystopian avant-garde suits that physically prevent fluid movement, staring directly into the camera lens with deadened, hollow eyes that possess absolutely none of that trademark, infectious sunshine warmth. The sheer psychological terror of watching the undisputed god of K-pop dance intentionally strip himself of all kinetic energy is indescribable. It is honestly like watching a beautiful, soaring bird deliberately snap its own wings right in front of you. But the mystery deepens even further when you connect this paralyzing stillness to the deeply unsettling rumors swirling around the actual sound of the 2026 lead single. According to highly placed industry insiders who have allegedly heard the heavily embargoed demo tracks, the new music features an incredibly chaotic, hyper-fast, almost aggressively abrasive drum and bass tempo, a blistering sonic landscape that practically begs for explosive, aggressive choreography. Yet the overwhelming whisper in the industry is that BTS's 2026 title track will feature absolutely zero choreography. None. For the very first time in their entire history, the group that literally built their global empire on the back of synchronized blood, sweat, and tears dancing is supposedly going to stand completely still. And who is allegedly spearheading this radical, incredibly dangerous anti-performance concept? Jungkook himself. Why? What incredibly profound, potentially devastating artistic statement is he trying to make? Is this a brutal, unflinching critique of the impossibly exhausting, machine-like expectations placed upon K-pop idols to be perpetually moving, perpetually performing, and perpetually smiling commodities for public consumption?
In his critically acclaimed 2022 solo album, Jack in the Box, he bravely showed us the darkness, the blind ambition, and the terrifying arson that fueled his passion. We thought that was his ultimate shadow self. But what if we were entirely wrong? What if Jack in the Box was merely the prologue to an even darker realization? What if during his 18 months of rigorous, disciplined military service, removed from the relentless, deafening cheers of the crowd, he fundamentally realized that the most powerful, disruptive, and rebellious thing a world-class dancer can possibly do in a society utterly obsessed with rapid-fire TikTok-style consumption is to simply refuse to move at all? Think about the colossal, unprecedented risk HYBE is taking if this is true. They are essentially stripping away their most famous, reliable weapon. The emotional whiplash for ARMY is incredibly severe right now. We desperately crave the comfort of his brilliant smile and the pure dopamine hit of his flawless body rolls, but he is forcefully denying us that comfort, demanding that we look at him not as a dancing machine, but as a deeply complex, perhaps deeply exhausted human being who is demanding absolute stillness in a chaotic world. Some brilliant theorists within the fandom are connecting this to ancient Greek mythology, specifically the tragic story of Atlas, suggesting that J-Hope has carried the immense physical burden of the group's performance for so long that he has now turned to stone, symbolizing the ultimate sacrifice of the body for the sake of true, raw artistic liberation. Every single time another silent, motionless, hauntingly beautiful yet undeniably creepy video drops on his feed, the collective anxiety of the fandom spikes to dangerous, unbearable levels. Is the sunshine permanently eclipsed? Is this terrifying, high-concept paralysis going to translate directly onto the massive, glaring lights of their reunion stadium tour, where 80,000 screaming fans will be forced to watch the greatest performers on Earth stand perfectly, unnervingly still while the music violently rages around them? The idea is so radically avant-garde, so profoundly risky, and completely out of character that it is keeping millions of dedicated fans awake at night, obsessively debating whether J-Hope is leading BTS toward their most brilliant, boundary-destroying artistic masterpiece yet, or if he is intentionally orchestrating the complete philosophical deconstruction of the very essence that made them global superstars, leaving us all desperately begging for just a single comforting step of familiar choreography in this strange, terrifying new era.
Number 3. Jimin's shattered reflections, untraceable. Let us pivot our desperate, searching eyes towards the absolute ethereal core of the group, Park Jimin, the mesmerizing fairy of BTS, the emotional glue who famously checks on every single member's well-being, and the artist who possesses an undeniable, almost supernatural ability to convey raw human agony and intoxicating love through the mere flick of his wrist. To fully grasp the sheer suffocating terror of the anomaly currently surrounding Jimin as we violently accelerate toward this 2026 mega comeback, we must first deeply understand the painfully intimate journey he has taken us on over the past few years. This is the artist who bravely gave us his debut solo album, Face, a critically acclaimed, painfully raw masterpiece where he courageously confronted his darkest, most unfiltered emotions, aggressively stripping away the glittering, glamorous idol persona to boldly reveal the isolating, brutal realities of pandemic-era fame in visceral tracks like Set Me Free Part 2 and the hauntingly beautiful, chart-topping synth-pop phenomenon like Crazy. Following that, he gifted us Muse, a vibrant, slightly brighter yet deeply nostalgic project featuring the delightfully eclectic Smeraldo Garden Marching Band, which led us to naively believe he had finally found his joyous inspiration and completely healed his inner child. He then dutifully enlisted alongside his eternal Bond brother Jungkook in the 5th Infantry Division, surviving harsh, freezing military winters as an artilleryman.
When they were both finally gloriously discharged together in June 2025, the global army wept absolute oceans of pure joy, fully expecting the immediate, comforting return of the deeply affectionate, giggly Jimin, who would predictably jump onto a midnight Weverse livestream, sitting casually on his apartment floor, sleepily and sweetly chatting with millions of adoring fans until the sun came up. But now, as the heavily guarded curtains of 2026 begin to twitch, a deeply disturbing, borderline supernatural anomaly has fundamentally hijacked Park Jimin's entire public existence, violently turning the fandom's comforting, warm dream into a terrifying, high-stakes psychological thriller. The Oddities centers entirely around a horrifying visual and auditory fragmentation that defies all logical explanation and completely betrays his established artistic identity. It all started incredibly subtly with the sudden, unannounced release of a heavily encrypted 15-second teaser video officially dropped by Big Hit Music at exactly midnight KST. In this gorgeously shot video, Jimin is standing perfectly still in a magnificent, opulent, dimly lit ballroom, completely surrounded by towering, ornate, antique mirrors. But eagle-eyed, hyper-analytical fans immediately noticed an absolutely chilling, impossible detail that instantly sent collective shivers down the internet's spine. His reflection in the mirrors does not match his physical movements. When the real Jimin slowly, agonizingly raises his right hand to touch his face, the countless reflections trapped in the glass remain completely motionless, staring back at the camera with cold, hollow, deadpan expressions that look entirely devoid of human soul. Then, even more terrifyingly, the reflections begin to move completely independently, turning their backs on the real Jimin and slowly walking away into the pitch-black, infinite depths of the mirrors, leaving him completely, devastatingly alone in an impossible, physics-defying room. Why on earth would the man who practically lived his entire youth grinding in front of the relentless, unforgiving mirrors of the HYBE dance practice studios suddenly introduce a high-concept, horror-tinged narrative where his own reflection actively abandons him? This deeply uncanny valley phenomenon isn't just limited to highly produced video teasers either. During a highly secretive, allegedly leaked photoshoot concept board for the monumental 2026 album, which sent HYBE's legal team into an absolute frenzy, every single image of Jimin features a violently shattered, deliberately distorted, or completely obscured face. He is wearing breathtaking, avant-garde couture, but his head is wrapped in thick, semi-transparent medical gauze, or his delicate features are aggressively blurred using a long-exposure motion blur technique that makes him look like a fleeting, terrifying ghost, rather than the breathtaking, flawless visual we are intimately used to. It fundamentally, violently contradicts the very essence of his solo masterpiece, Face, where he bravely confronted his true self. Is this chaotic 2026 era suggesting that after finally confronting his face, he has now actively, destructively decided to shatter it? Could this terrifying shattered reflection tie directly back to the tragic Smeraldo flower lore from the iconic Love Yourself era, the heartbreaking story of a grotesque, deeply insecure man who hid in a ruined castle, wearing a mask because he believed he was too ugly to hand a flower to the woman he loved? Is Jimin now methodically embodying that very mask, convinced by the crushing weight of global expectations that his true, vulnerable form is no longer suitable for the blindingly bright lights of the 2026 stage? But the profound visual horror is honestly only half of the story. The unprecedented auditory anomaly is what is truly breaking armies' hearts and sparking fierce, panicked debates across every single social media platform. Park Jimin is globally revered for his ethereal, razor-sharp, and emotionally devastating countertenor voice, a celestial, brilliantly gender-fluid vocal tone that effortlessly soars through the highest octaves, famously giving tracks like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Lie, and Filter their iconic, deadly allure. We have literally conditioned our brains and hearts to desperately seek out his angelic high notes as the emotional, cathartic climax of any BTS song. However, highly reliable, terrified whispers from renowned international producers who were reportedly flown into Seoul under strict non-disclosure agreements for the final album mixing sessions claim that Jimin's signature soaring high register has been completely, meticulously scrubbed from the new tracks. Instead of his breathtaking vocals, his lines are allegedly delivered in a raspy, deeply unsettling, almost spoken word whisper, layered heavily with dark metallic vocal synthesizers and aggressive dystopian auto-tune distortion that renders his unique voice completely unrecognizable. It supposedly sounds less like a human being singing and far more like a desperate, dying AI struggling to perfectly replicate human emotion through a broken, static-filled radio transmission. Why would HYBE deliberately and ruthlessly mute one of the most unique, beautiful, and commercially successful instruments in the entire global music industry? Is this a devastatingly brilliant avant-garde commentary on the agonizing loss of personal identity and the commodification of the human voice in the hyper-manufactured, intensely scrutinized world of K-pop? Has the immense, unfathomable pressure of returning to the absolute global throne after the lengthy military hiatus caused Jimin to conceptually fracture his own persona, hiding his true, bleeding self behind a wall of shattered glass and distorted frequencies just to protect his highly vulnerable heart? Let's dive even deeper into the profound emotional implications of this chilling metamorphosis. Jimin has always, without fail, been the member most deeply, profoundly terrified of disappointing the fans. He is the relentless perfectionist who would ruthlessly punish himself for a single, barely noticeable voice crack during a grueling 3-hour live stadium tour. The absolute deafening silence and severe lack of personal communication from him right now. No Weverse posts, no spontaneous live streams, no comforting reassurances. Feels deliberately, incredibly painful, withholding of the deep affection we have relied on for over 13 years. If the 2026 comeback is truly supposed to be a joyous, confetti-filled reunion, why does Jimin's specific conceptual arc feel like a tragic, isolating descent into an inescapable mirrored labyrinth of psychological torment? Are we currently witnessing the birth of a dark, uncontrollable alter ego that has completely consumed the sweet, loving, real Jimin? Or is this entire terrifying spectacle a masterful, intricate illusion designed to make the eventual triumphant reveal of his true, smiling face that much more emotionally shattering for the entire world? Brilliant K-pop cultural theorists are going absolutely crazy trying to decode the hidden meaning, with some fiercely suggesting this explicitly references the clinical psychological concept of depersonalization, a heavy, debilitating trauma response where a person feels entirely detached from their own physical body and reflection, often triggered by immense, unmanageable levels of stress and public scrutiny. If Jimin is legitimately using the absolute biggest musical comeback in modern history to artistically, aggressively explore the terrifying, suffocating reality of losing oneself to the blinding lights of unimaginable fame, then this is no longer just a simple pop album. It is a raw, bleeding, avant-garde psychological exhibition that will permanently alter the landscape of the music industry. Every single time we desperately try to catch a comforting glimpse of the old, familiar Jimin in these cryptic, terrifying new teasers, the glass violently shatters all over again, leaving us with bloody hands and a million terrifying questions that nobody at Big Hit Music is willing to answer. Is the sweet, loving fairy of BTS entirely gone? Permanently
Number 2. Taehyung's tactical paranoia decoded. Let us shift our investigative lens to the deeply enigmatic, endlessly captivating visual center of BTS, Kim Taehyung, our beloved V, the man whose deeply soulful husky baritone voice and effortlessly intoxicating vintage aesthetic have practically defined the romantic, nostalgic undertones of the group's entire discography. To truly comprehend the massive, deeply unsettling anomaly currently surrounding Taehyung as we hurtle toward this monumental 2026 reunion, we must intimately revisit the striking, heavily contrasting duality of his recent past.
Remember the beautifully languid, sepia-toned perfection of his 2023 solo debut album, Layover? That project was an absolute masterclass in stripped-down, analog vulnerability. It was a deeply personal, jazz-infused love letter to slow mornings, film cameras, his beloved Pomeranian Yantan, and the quiet, aching romance of simply existing in a chaotic world. He invited us into his gentle, unstructured soul, proving that the world's biggest pop star could effortlessly thrive in the quiet, dusty corners of a smoky, old-school jazz club. But then, in a move that completely shocked the entire K-pop industry, this gentle, romantic soul voluntarily enlisted in the incredibly grueling, highly elite Special Duty Team, South Korea's formidable anti-terrorism military police unit. We watched in absolute breathless awe as the man who used to paint his nails and wear exquisite flowing silk blouses transformed into a formidable, heavily muscled tactical operator, clad in midnight black combat gear, wielding sniper rifles and rappelling down the sides of high-rise buildings with lethal, terrifying precision. We all proudly and perhaps naively assumed that this intense military chapter would simply be a temporary badass detour, and that upon his highly anticipated discharge in 2025, the soft, jazz-loving Vante would immediately return, picking up his vintage Leica camera and serenading us with warm, romantic R&B melodies for the 2026 comeback. But the reality unfolding right now in the shadows of HYBE is violently contradicting that comforting expectation, presenting an oddity so incredibly severe that it feels like we are watching a psychological espionage thriller rather than a pop music rollout. The anomaly revolves entirely around a terrifying, hyper-calculated, and completely paranoid surveillance aesthetic that has aggressively hijacked Taehyung's entire artistic and public identity. A few weeks ago, Taehyung's meticulously curated Instagram feed, which historically served as a breathtaking romantic gallery of his global travels, behind-the-scenes fashion shoots, and late-night jazz recommendations, underwent a chilling, total metamorphosis. All the warm, sepia-toned film photographs were violently archived in the dead of night. In their place, a heavily encrypted, deeply unsettling barrage of media began to flood his grid, exclusively posted at unpredictable, highly specific tactical intervals. We are no longer seeing the beautiful face of Kim Taehyung. Instead, we're being subjected to a relentless stream of cold, highly classified-looking thermal imaging videos, stark night vision drone footage hovering ominously over unnamed, desolate cityscapes, and terrifying, high-contrast satellite photographs that feature heavily redacted coordinates and aggressive, blood-red crosshairs targeting seemingly random, empty intersections in major global capitals. Why on earth is the absolute romantic king of BTS suddenly adopting the aggressive, paranoia-inducing visual language of a rogue intelligence agency? The sheer psychological whiplash of seeing the man who gave us the comforting, wintry warmth of Snowflower and Winter Bear suddenly posting heavily distorted, intercepted radio chatter and raw, uncrackable Morse code audio files is leaving the entire global fandom in a state of absolute, frantic bewilderment. Highly dedicated army cryptographers who have spent literal years masterfully decoding the Bangtan universe lore have spent thousands of sleepless hours running these terrifying new audio files through advanced military-grade spectrograms, only to discover horrifying, hidden visual warnings embedded within the sound waves themselves. Repeated, stark phrases like, "The target is compromised," "Do not trust the transmission," and "The layover is permanently cancelled." This last phrase is what truly sent a dagger of pure, unadulterated ice straight through the collective heart of the fandom. Layover was supposed to be a temporary stop on his journey, but is he now brutally declaring that the destination we were all expecting him to reach in 2026 simply does not exist anymore? Furthermore, heavily guarded whispers from elite industry insiders and producers allegedly working on the highly secretive 2026 tracks suggest that Taehyung has entirely and perhaps permanently abandoned his trademark, intoxicatingly warm jazz vocals. The rumors circulating the underground K-pop scene claim that V is now exclusively utilizing a chilling, heavily manipulated, almost mechanical vocal delivery, entirely stripping away his natural, beautiful vibrato to sound like a cold, emotionless artificial intelligence broadcasting a highly classified warning over a hijacked emergency frequency. He is allegedly refusing to sing any traditional melodies, instead opting for rhythmic, spoken-word tactical commands layered over incredibly dark, pulsating industrial synth bass beats that sound less like a stadium anthem and far more like the heart-stopping soundtrack to a cyber warfare operation. Think deeply about the immense, terrifying implications of this drastic transformation. Has the intense, high-stakes, life-or-death reality of his time in the special duty team fundamentally rewired his artistic brain, effectively killing the soft, romantic jazz singer and giving birth to a hyper-vigilant, cold-blooded tactical operator who views this entire 2026 comeback not as a joyous reunion, but as a highly dangerous, carefully calculated mission? We have always relied on Taehyung's unique, eccentric, and beautifully spontaneous Tata mic energy to inject a sense of unpredictable, deeply human joy into the heavily structured world of BTS. He was the wild card who would delightfully break the rules just to make us smile. But this new, terrifying persona is completely devoid of spontaneity. Every single glitch, every single redacted coordinate, and every single encrypted thermal image feels ruthlessly calculated, aggressively precise, and completely, utterly devoid of warmth. Is this incredibly dark, surveillance-driven concept a brilliant, avant-garde commentary on the inescapable, suffocating reality of being the most watched, photographed, and scrutinized human being on the entire planet? Is he taking the invasive, terrifying lenses of the paparazzi and the obsessive public and violently turning them back onto us, forcing the entire world to experience the paralyzing paranoia of living under a constant microscopic microscope? The emotional devastation of losing the comforting, romantic illusion of layover to this cold, tactical, and aggressively hostile aesthetic is causing massive, intense debates across the fandom. Are we completely losing the Kim Taehyung who looked at us with eyes full of pure galaxies and universe-spanning love? Is he deliberately burning down his good boy image to prove that he is no longer the beautiful, delicate flower of the group, but rather the most dangerous, lethal weapon in their 2026 arsenal? Every single time a new, terrifyingly cold satellite image drops on his social media, accompanied by a string of unreadable binary code, we are painfully forced to question if the breathtaking, soulful artist we sent off to the military in 2023 has been completely, permanently replaced by a shadowy, untouchable operative who has traded his jazz records for encrypted classified files, leaving us utterly terrified, hopelessly mesmerized, and desperately wondering what on earth he is fiercely guarding in the pitch-black shadows of this highly suspicious, unpredictable reunion.
Number 1. Jungkook's absolute erasure. Unprecedented. Let us finally arrive at the absolute pinnacle of our investigation, the undeniable center of gravity for the entire Bangtan universe and the grand culmination of this massive 2026 mystery. Jungkook, the undisputed golden maknae, the global pop phenomenon who literally holds the world's heart in his hands. To truly grasp the overwhelming, almost suffocating magnitude of the anomaly currently surrounding Jungkook as we stand on the precipice of this historic reunion, we must intimately rewind and examine the sheer, blinding velocity of his solo career just before his enlistment.
We are talking about the golden era, an absolute masterclass in pop music domination that saw him effortlessly shatter global streaming records, shutting down Times Square in New York City with a surprise performance that drew tens of thousands of screaming fans into the streets, and proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he possessed the raw, undeniable star power to rival the greatest pop icons in modern history, like Michael Jackson or Justin Timberlake. Throughout 2023, he was absolutely everywhere. He was the ubiquitous, comforting presence who would spontaneously turn on a Weverse live broadcast at 3 in the morning, inviting millions of global fans into his living room to watch him fold his laundry, cook midnight snacks, sing impromptu, hour-long karaoke sessions, and even peacefully fall asleep on camera. He was the most intensely accessible, deeply intimate, and fiercely beloved superstar on the planet, willingly giving us every single piece of his heart and his daily life. When he bravely chose to enlist alongside his eternal Bond brother Jimin in the grueling 5th Infantry Division, a companion enlistment that profoundly moved the entire global fandom to tears, we all collectively held our breath, incredibly proud but deeply devastated to lose our daily dose of his bright, infectious energy. We naturally assumed that upon his highly anticipated discharge in June 2025, the hyper-connected, deeply affectionate Jungkook would immediately return to our screens, ready to lead the 2026 BTS comeback with his soaring angelic vocals and his relentless powerhouse choreography. However, the reality we are currently facing is a chilling, deafening silence that is sparking the most intense, desperate wave of suspicion and existential dread the ARMY fandom has ever experienced. The central oddity isn't some complex sci-fi conspiracy. It is the absolute, deliberate, and masterful digital erasure of his own existence, an erasure that actually began long before we fully realized its terrifying implications. Remember when, at the absolute height of his global solo fame in early 2023, he casually and permanently deleted his personal Instagram account, effortlessly throwing away a platform with over 50 million followers simply because he didn't use it much? At the time, we laughed it off as classic, unpredictable Jungkook behavior. But now, in the highly secretive landscape of 2026, that isolated incident feels like a massive, glaring prologue to his current impenetrable silence. The spontaneous 4-hour live streams are completely gone. The comforting late-night check-ins have vanished into thin air. There are 0 leaked studio photos, 0 cryptic teasers, and absolutely 0 indications of what he is mathematically or artistically planning for the most important group comeback of the decade. This profound absence is violently colliding with the astronomical, almost crushing expectations placed upon his shoulders. Since he was merely 15 years old, Jungkook has carried the unimaginable weight of being the center of BTS. He has been the flawless vocal backbone, the relentless visual anchor, and the golden child who had to be perfect at absolutely everything to maintain the group's meteoric rise. But what happens when the boy who grew up exclusively within the blinding, unforgiving spotlight finally experiences the quiet, structured, and entirely anonymous routine of ordinary life for 18 months in the military? The incredibly grounded, deeply psychological reality that is currently terrifying fans is the strong, undeniable possibility that Jungkook has fundamentally realized he no longer wants to be the center of the universe. Is this total digital erasure a deliberate, ironclad boundary being drawn by a young man who has spent his entire youth sacrificing his private identity for public consumption? K-pop cultural analysts and fiercely dedicated fans are frantically debating whether this 2026 comeback will reveal a completely transformed artist who aggressively refuses to play the traditional, hyper-visible idol game anymore. Are we going to see a Jungkook who firmly steps back from the grueling front line of the choreography, choosing instead to be a mysterious, behind-the-scenes creative director? Or an elusive, reclusive vocalist who completely shuns the intense media circus that defined his teenage years? The sheer, unadulterated emotional terror of this possibility is immense, precisely because we have always relied on his endless, burning passion to perform for us. If the golden maknae, the literal engine of the BTS performance machine, has methodically decided to permanently log off, wipe his digital footprint, and only communicate strictly through heavily guarded, highly conceptual musical releases, it completely changes the entire fundamental DNA of the group. It is not a glitch in the matrix, it is the awe-inspiring, yet deeply intimidating evolution of a grown man ruthlessly reclaiming his soul. Every single day that passes without a word, a sound, or a smile from the man who used to share his very breath with us, the panicked whispers grow louder. Is he intentionally starving the global media to build the most explosive, earth-shattering anticipation the music industry has ever witnessed? Or is this absolute erasure a permanent, non-negotiable condition for his return to the stage? As we stare into the terrifying, pitch-black void where our brightest star used to constantly shine, we are forcefully reminded that the most profound mystery of this entire 2026 reunion isn't hidden in encrypted codes or shattered mirrors. It is hidden in the quiet, sovereign, and entirely unpredictable heart of Jungkook, leaving the entire world desperately waiting to see if the golden maknae will return to his throne, or if he has already walked away to build an entirely new kingdom in the shadows.